We all search for that spark which fuels our desire to fully engage in our lives. We look for the courage to experience moments where we can come alive instead of watching life pass us by. You're listening to The Front Row Factor, leaving fear and insecurity behind by exploring stories of top performers that are living life in the front row. Get ready to stand up, step up, and live it up with your host, John Vroman.
Hello and welcome to the Front Row Factor podcast, where we talk to people living life in the front row. Today we're talking with Matt Tenney. He's the author of two great books. His first one, Serve to be Great. This is a little teaser, by the way, for the show here today. The tagline is Leadership Lessons from a Prison, a Monastery, and a Boardroom. That should set up today's interview. His newest book, The Mindfulness Edge, How to Rewire Your Brain for Leadership and Personal Excellence Without Adding to Your Schedule, is probably going to be available right as you're listening to this show. So Matt gave us this great interview right as his book is launching. We're so grateful. We love this guy. He's got an incredible story. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I'm just going to get right into it. But we're going to explore a lot of different topics here. Enjoy my chat with Mr. Matt Tenney. All right, Matt Tenney, we're live, buddy. Welcome. Good morning. How you feeling?
I'm feeling fantastic, and I'm excited to be chatting with you. You're one of my favorite people on this planet, so I'm really looking forward to chatting with you over the next few minutes. I guess it's probably about close to an hour we'll chat.
Yeah, Matt, thanks, man. I appreciate those words. I really do. You and I have probably said similar things to one another for the past couple years that we've known each other. We met actually at a speaking event. I remember learning about your story, being blown away, not just by your story, Matt, but who you were in that moment. What was great was that you exemplified, you projected mindfulness long before I knew that you were a mindfulness expert. And so I think that you walking in that emotion really helped to just frame who you were as an individual. And I remember thinking to myself right away, here's one of the good guys. Like, here's a good guy who I just felt in my heart we were going to be friends for a long time.
I felt the same way.
And I know, here's what's great. I know that what's fun is not only feeling that way about somebody, but having similar paths in life. I mean, we're writing, we're speaking, and we have a chance to then talk about these things. The good news is there's quite a few people in our audience today that are interested in writing and speaking and learning and sharing, which is really what we're both passionate about. So, dude, let's take a moment and introduce you to the community, to the Front Row community. And dude, I'd love to just get the Matt Tenney story, which I know is difficult to wrap up into a couple of minutes. You're as a keynote speaker, you can share this story and all the lessons that come from it over an hour of captivating an audience. So I'm going to challenge you here, brother. Dude, how do you package all this in whatever? Dude, how about this? A couple of minutes or within 30 minutes. There's your boundary. 3 to 30 minute life story. But no, all kidding aside, I want to tell everybody that this is a great story. It is a story that involves some struggle and some breakthroughs. And you can read more if you are listening today and you get inspired. Serve to be Great is one of Matt's books, and it's awesome. I was a big fan. And I told you earlier today before we started this call that I knew your story, but reading about it was really captivating as well. And so anyway, dude, take us back. Maybe start with, your childhood in the 10-year-ish mark, and then take us from there.
Sure. Well, maybe what I could do is I'll give you the so-called 3-minute version that you requested. And then whatever piques your interest or you think might be of interest to your audience, you could just ask me to go deeper.
Even
you
better.
Want to go deeper.
I love it.
So, and if I think if I start at 10, I don't know if I'll be able to do this in 3 minutes. So, just to give it kind of the early, or I guess an overview of early life, I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to go fly for the United States Marine Corps. So I graduated college and went right into the Marine Corps as an officer. Went to the basic school in Quantico, Virginia as a second lieutenant, and realized there that I wasn't sure that I did want to serve, but I wasn't sure that I wanted to serve for 10 or 12 years, which is about what it would be if I was a pilot. So I actually gave up a contract that I had to fly airplanes and just went the ground route and ended up being assigned as the adjutant to an infantry battalion in California at Camp Pendleton Marine Corps base in California. And an adjutant is essentially like the executive assistant to a CEO, but in the military. So, I was in charge of somewhere between 10 and 15 Marines that all did the administration for this infantry battalion. And about 2 years into my time in the Marine Corps, I guess maybe an aside here is that one thing I was always interested in, I was never interested in things. Like I've never actually owned a television, never owned clothing. I've never purchased clothing of any substantial amount. Everything that I wear that has a name brand on it is something that was gifted to me. But I was really interested in owning my time. I had this idea that, financial freedom was something that would be very worthwhile. And part of it was laziness. I just wanted to be able to not have to go to work for a living. But part of it had sound motivation. I found a lot of pleasure in serving. And even before I had kind of the epiphany that we'll talk about in a minute, I found that like when I was really happy in life was when I was doing stuff to help other people. But I kept forgetting that message and going back to just serving myself. So anyway, about 2.5 years into my time in the Marine Corps, an opportunity just kind of arose from out of nowhere. I wasn't looking for this. I wasn't trying to go find a way to have a shortcut to financial freedom, but I learned about an opportunity to arrange the delivery of a pretty large sum of money. And at first I didn't think there was any way I could do it, but over a period of about 5 months, I thought, I kind of rationalized to myself, and I told myself, I'm not stealing from a person, this is government money and they waste all this money. And so somehow I convinced myself that I should at least find out if it was possible to arrange this delivery that was not authorized. It was something that I was doing that was against the rules. And so I actually did that. I arranged the unauthorized delivery of almost $3 million of U.S. government money in January of 2001. And as soon as I had the delivery arranged, I realized there was absolutely no way that I could steal money from anyone, let alone the government. And I didn't even have a plan for picking the money up. So I abandoned the whole thing. But it was too late. The government was already aware of what I was doing, and I was arrested. And as a result of being both stupid and dishonest, I ended up spending 5.5 years confined to a military prison. And, as you would imagine, or I imagine anyone listening would imagine, that's probably not a highlight of your life, and it wasn't for me. In fact, the first 6 months that I was there, I spent almost in what was essentially solitary confinement. So this was without a doubt the worst period of my life at first. I was even suicidal for a couple of weeks at one point when I thought I was going to be there for 50 or 60 years. But after about, maybe 6 months to 12 months, I started to adjust, and I started to wrap my head around this idea that, okay, this is going to be 5 to 6 years. I mean, that's a long time. I was 24 at the time. This is 15 years ago. So it's a while back. But at that point, that's a quarter of my life. So it still sounded like a pretty long time, but I could at least wrap my head around it. And so I started looking for what opportunities might be there. And I ended up learning through books about this practice called mindfulness. And I'm kind of an obsessive type A personality by nature. And so when something makes sense to me, I just go at it 100%. And I went at this practice 100%. And within about 6 months of starting the practice, I was happier right there in a military prison with nothing than I'd ever been in my life. And so this inspired me to go as deep as I could with the practice. And I was learning principally through talks that monks had given. So I was learning from monks through these recorded talks that were put into books. And I decided, I'm going to transform this prison into a monastery and live and train exactly as monks do. And I did that for the last 3.5 years of the time that I was there. And there were two big lessons that came out of it. One was that I learned how to be happy with nothing. So I realized that as long as we are alive and breathing, we can train to have a happiness that requires nothing other than that. And this is replicable. And if we want to talk about it, I can share that. But it's not just me. This is something that anybody can do. But the second thing was that, the monastic ideal, I know a lot of people think of monks and they think, oh yeah, those are those lazy dudes, right? That just sit around and contemplate their navels all day or something. And I thought that at first too, but I realized that actually the monastic ideal is incredibly inspiring. There's essentially two components. One is you're training yourself to be the most kind, compassionate human being that you can possibly become. And then you're training you're devoting yourself to helping others to have that same type of those qualities, and to realize freedom from their own suffering and be able to have happiness. So it's really a life that's completely devoted to serving others. And it absolutely transformed my experience of being confined into one of the most, if not the most meaningful experience of my life. And so that's kind of been my focus ever since, is what can I do to be of greater service to the people around me? And that led to co-founding and leading a couple nonprofit organizations. And as I saw that this spirit of service, we really focus on serving others, when I was applying that to team members, I noticed, wow, this actually improves the performance of teams. So it's not just that it feels good to serve others, it's actually good for achieving organizational outcomes. And that's what kind of started the work that I do now, where I work with leaders in different organizations to help them be more effective at consistently and effectively serving team members, so that they can achieve better performance with their teams and better organizational outcomes. But my motive is that I'm happy for them to achieve better business outcomes. But what I really think is key here is that when people develop these qualities and are more effective at taking care of their own peace of mind and more effectively serving others, all their team members benefit and the community around them benefits. So it's a way to really have a positive impact on the world at a large scale. So that was maybe a little over 3 minutes, but that's kind of that's the overview in a nutshell.
That's really good, man. You accepted the challenge and you crushed it. Great job. As you're telling the story, I'm realizing it's like, I wish I was just getting the whole 60-minute keynote right now, because all of what you share has great wisdom to it, and your story is amazing. I want to talk about some specific elements of this too, Matt.
Sure.
One of which is, and I pull this right from your site today, which is that you shared your primary goal is to create the conditions for a permanent end to poverty, violence, and suffering in our world within your lifetime. That was, as you say, my lifetime. So can you expand on that? Tell us a little bit how you got to that, a little bit of the heart behind that.
Yeah, that's actually kind of what I was alluding to when I stated that my time in confinement became so meaningful, was that, if we really think about, there's a lot of problems in our world. I think we can all agree with that, right? And most of them man-made. And, the natural ones we can't do anything about. So we should get over it, right? We can't do anything about bad weather. We can't do anything about earthquakes. We just have to learn to deal with these things if we're on this planet. But there are many, many additional problems that we create, man creates. And, so if you think about, okay, well, if I wanted to make it so that the world didn't have this unnecessary suffering like poverty or violence, how would we make that happen? And there are a lot of organizations that work to alleviate specific elements of these problems, and it's great that they're out there. But I think, if we really reflect, we have to be honest with ourselves, and we would say, well, let's just say hypothetically that we solved every one of them right now with a snap of our fingers. There's no poverty. There's no violence. Everybody shares, equally. They're not hoarding resources. No one's trying to hurt each other because there's no weapons to hurt each other, whatever the case may be. Everyone has equal access to education, to medicine, to the resources they need to be happy and healthy. How long would that last, would you guess?
That's a good question.
25 years, maybe?
Yeah.
50 at the most?
Yeah.
And why? The reason that would only last such a short time is because just by removing weapons or making everyone have equal resources, if we don't change the minds of the human beings that inhabit this planet, then what's going to happen in 25 years is all the greedy people are going to hoard resources again, and poverty will be reestablished.
Yeah, exactly.
All of the violent people are going to find new ways to hurt each other and subjugate people. So what I realized was that, and this is no epiphany of my own, this is something that's been taught for years and years and years, centuries actually, is that really the only way to create world peace, so to speak, is for each person to have peace within themselves, to have contentment, and to be free from the poisons of anger and violence and greed, and to cultivate qualities of kindness and compassion. So I realized that even while I was confined, I could be moving towards that goal. Right? If I'm doing whatever I can to be the most peaceful, compassionate, kind, generous human being that I can be, and I help the people around me. I mean, there was so much suffering in that place. Almost everyone that was there, I would say, was there because they were suffering and they didn't know how to deal with it. And so they did something that got them in trouble and they were confined. So I realized that if I could help those people not suffer, then maybe they wouldn't come back to prison when they were released. Maybe they wouldn't commit another crime. And if I treated the guards with kindness and compassion and showed them, that a level of happiness that they've maybe never seen before, maybe they would go home and treat their wives better or their husbands better. So I realized that even from that place, like inside those walls, I could create a ripple effect that was in effect moving in that direction of creating the conditions for a permanent end to poverty and violence and unnecessary suffering. Because that permanent end is when every single person has unconditional happiness and has a high level of kindness and compassion and generosity. And so I realize now that when I started, teaching mindfulness to others, I thought, well, how could I I have a very short lifespan, right? We're maybe going to be on this planet 100 years tops. So what could I do to make the greatest movement in that direction while I'm alive? And I realized that probably the greatest thing I could do is try to help people who have a lot of influence, people who are leaders of large organizations, large companies, help them to develop these qualities, make the connection between developing these qualities and a better bottom line. And there is a definite connection there. There's no way about it. If you want to have a successful organization over the long term, building these qualities of kindness and compassion and generosity, basically emotional intelligence, is absolutely essential for doing it. So I help them see that, okay, this is really good for business, right? This is going to help you, your teams perform better and improve the performance of your organization. But I know that if they're developing these qualities, if they're becoming free from greed, free from anger, that this is what's creating the conditions for a permanent end to poverty and violence and other unnecessary suffering on our planet. And if they're developing these qualities because they're people of influence, they could then say, wow, this has been transformative for me. I want to give this to my teams. I want to give this, maybe it's a company of 30,000 people. I want everyone in the company to be trained in how they can develop these qualities. And so that's kind of why I do what I do. And that's why, the name of the corporation that I formed for the speaking company is actually called Wanna Save the World, Inc. And I don't usually share that. You won't find that on the website anywhere except for maybe like the copyright or something someplace. But that's for me. That's to remind me that why am I waking up in the morning? Well, the reason I wake up in the morning is because we have a short life and I want to do something that makes a difference while I'm alive. And that is, to me, it's twofold. One, it's in each moment, I want to make sure that I'm treating every person, whether it's my wife or my newborn son or a janitor that I come across in a building, every single person, I want to make sure that I'm treating them in a way that adds value to their life, that at least does no harm, but hopefully adds some type of value. But then on the second side is, wow, I have this opportunity. I've been given a platform for whatever reason. A major publisher decided they want to publish a book with me, and this has opened up doors for me to go speak to different organizations. I have this platform. How can I use it most wisely? And I think that's why I get up in the morning, is to use it wisely and to make that type of impact in our world.
Hey, Matt, when you've made the declaration that you are here to serve, that every conversation, every person that you're with, you're looking at it from a point of service, do you find that when you develop that reputation that people show up to you with their hands out, ready to accept your service, and they become a little extra needy? Do you find that happens?
No. In fact, I find the exact opposite. Of course, that's going to happen. And I don't know if there's hard data on this. I know I've seen estimates from different social scientists that roughly 10% of the population is going to be, they're not going to do anything. They're just going to keep asking for help. They're not going to help themselves. They're not going to help anyone else. And, I know there are a lot of people out there who are givers and they want to serve, especially your audience, because if they resonate with you, you have one of the biggest hearts of a servant that I've ever met. So if they resonate with you, it's probably because they see something of themselves in you and they want to keep fueling that fire of, hey, I want to be the most awesome human being I can become. So I'd imagine your audience, there's probably a lot of people who feel like they are doing that. They're try to help wherever they can. Yeah, they're givers. They want to serve. And you may have people that say people take advantage of it. And, what I've come to realize is that those people, like, helping them in the short term actually isn't helping them. What we're doing is enabling them. So if I have a person that I give some time to and I try to help, and then I see that they don't do anything to help themselves, or they're not doing anything to help others and pay it forward, I have a conversation with them as soon as possible. And I say, look, I have very limited time. If I invest time in you and you do nothing to help yourself or help others, I view that as time that's wasted, that I could be helping somebody else who is going to help themselves and pay it forward. So I would love to help you, but this is what I need to see. I need to see you do A, B, and C. And if I don't see it, then I can't help you anymore. And sometimes it may sound harsh, but I think sometimes that's the most helpful thing you can do, because it allows somebody to really, they may hit rock bottom. They may do something that's really difficult. And then they realize, wow, like I do have to do something for myself. But that's like I said, in my experience, I think it's less than 10%. I would say it's probably like 5%.
Right.
Most people I find, when I have this spirit of service, not only do they want to immediately try to help me, which I'm not concerned about. I usually say, when somebody says, what can I do for you? I say, just pay this forward and help somebody else.
Yeah.
And I find that people do that. There's something contagious about serving and helping. I think it's something hardwired into us. It's like this universal truth that when we connect with each other in a way where we're lifting each other up, helping each other, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Like, I think we all kind of know that. Like, that's what life is about. And so there's something contagious about it. And I think when people are around that, they want to go help others. In fact, I've had many people comment about that after a keynote, where they send me an email and said, I immediately took action. I did this. I left your talk wanting to go help. And I just was so moved to do that. And I did it. And this is what I noticed. And so that's what I see more of, is that when we interact with people in that mode of, what can I do to help you? What can I do to meet the legitimate needs that you have? Not your wants, but what can I do to help you meet the legitimate needs that you have? And when we do that, I found that most people immediately want to reciprocate and or pay it forward to somebody else.
Matt, you may have just answered this, but when you write a book, which you now have 2 excellent books, and you give a keynote, right? Or you're sharing, or you're consulting, because are you with Perth still?
Yes.
Yeah. So, or you're working with a client in a consulting role. What's music to your ears? What is fuel for your soul? What occurs with a person? Is it a letter they give you? Is it something they do? How have you been able to see your impact? What is it, and how does it make you feel? Does anything come to mind when I talk about that?
Oh yeah, there are many things that come to mind. And generally what really, really hits home for me is when somebody makes the connection between what they can do to increase their capacity to serve others, and how that not only benefits, the kind of worldly interest of team performance, but also just makes it so that it's more enjoyable to wake up in the morning and go to work, And so there have been many cases of that where, in fact, one of the speaking engagements that I had earlier this year was the result of, somebody read the book. They were a government official in California. They run one of the special districts in California. And he started changing things in his culture and tried to make the culture much more aligned with the spirit of service, not only for the customer that they serve, which is the citizens of the district that they're in California, but even each other as team members. And he was immediately seeing benefit from that, and he was so inspired that, like, this is the greatest thanks I think I could ever get, was that he went to the leadership of the association that he's a part of and said, we got to have this guy come in and speak. And so then I think what generally happens that I guess is really, really hitting home and in the moment is just hearing how so many people come up when sharing these things, or after I've shared some ideas about how to do this, and they share how, this is something I've always wanted to do and tried to do, and this is how I want to lead, but I never knew that, one, that there was kind of a formal leadership philosophy around this called being a serving leader or a servant leader. And 2, I didn't realize that there was such a strong connection between doing this and achieving better business outcomes. And so that makes it, and I'm sure you experience this after talks, you have people that just really resonate with the message. And it's just so inspiring to see how many people want to do this.
Yeah.
I think we tend to get skeptical of human beings because of what we see on the news. If you watch the news or what you hear being reported in the news, that people are generally bad, and we're not doing things to help each other, because all you see is the bad stuff, in the news. And what I've noticed, and you probably have, is that after I give a talk, if there's 500 people in the audience, almost everyone that I talk to, even if I talk to 100 people, almost everyone says, like, this is who I am. This is how I've always wanted to be, and I want to do this more.
Yeah.
And it kind of, like, I feel like I get inspired more from that than probably what I give to anyone else through writing or speaking.
Yeah.
I get inspired from just seeing how many people, especially with younger generations, even more so, just how much more focused people are on serving each other. And that's what really is moves the needle for me in terms of positive emotion.
I want to make an observation, Matt, and then also a question for you. The observation is that as we develop principles around the front row factor, and these are principles for people to ultimately live a front row life, which we consider a fully engaged life, fully in the moment, present, where the mindfulness concepts tie in so perfectly to all this. What's really fascinating to me is we have a concept of what's in your front row, and that what's in our immediate proximity really affects our life in a major way. So how do we shape our environment in order to be the most productive? You've given me a different way of looking at this today, which I'm really grateful for. And that is that I'm constantly asking myself, what can I change literally about my physical environment? So what can I hang up over here? I got Post-it notes over here, dreams wall over here. But you talked about transforming the prison cell into a monastery, right? You said, how do I transform this? So you did that in your mind. You created this space into a new environment. But that mental shift of seeing your environment differently gave you the context to be able to create something new for yourself. Am I saying that correctly?
No, I think that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
I think that's just so awesome. I think that's brilliant. So even if somebody's listening today and they're looking at their environment saying, I can't change my physical environment, well, then you can just change the way you see your physical environment. Give it a different label, give it a different meaning, and then something will change. So I thought that was powerful.
I think it can certainly be some benefit to cognitive reframing like that. But what I did was actually a little more subtle than that. And I think this is probably more applicable to people in the quote unquote real world. And that is that instead of immediately trying to cognitively reframe, what I think, and this is probably the core element of mindfulness training, is to just take a moment to recognize, well, what is actually here? What's actually coming in through my senses in this moment? And what's actually going through my mind in this moment. And so what allowed me to completely transcend the prison and allow it to, in principle, be a monastery and not a prison, was that if you think about how our mind normally works, it's always making comparisons. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Absolutely.
We're always thinking about, how does this compare to what I did yesterday or last year, or what I'm going to do tomorrow or a year from now? The mind is always just taking, okay, this is this, and now comparing it to this. And that's fine. It's normal. The problem is we get caught up in those comparisons. We believe them, right? We give them a lot more weight than we need to. And part of what mindfulness training allows us to do is when we're able to sustain this perspective of not being caught in our thinking, but being able to actually observe our thinking objectively, almost as though it's kind of like a heads-up display that we use as a tool, then it's not controlling us. And one of the first things that we start to get some freedom from is this comparing mind. And that's what led to freedom for me. Was, let's use this as an example. And this can apply to anyone, anywhere. Let's say in my example, it was, being in a prison cell, brushing my teeth. If I'm not comparing that moment to brushing my teeth at home or brushing my teeth in a 5-star hotel, how is brushing my teeth any different in a prison cell than it is at home or in a 5-star hotel? It's just brushing the teeth.
Right.
The problems don't come in until my mind starts saying, oh, but there's this door that's locked me in, and there's these guards outside that don't treat me very nice, and there might be somebody who wants to shank me 4 cells down. And once all those thoughts come in, now I've just created hell out of nothing. I'm just brushing my teeth. If I'm just brushing my teeth, there's no problem. Now to bring that to the more day to day, imagine that you're sitting in traffic, right? And you're really frustrated because you're going to be 10 minutes late because you're sitting in traffic. Now, that's all created in the mind, isn't it?
Yep.
If you're just sitting in a car and all you're doing is noticing, what does it feel like to hold the steering wheel? What does the music sound like coming in through my ears? What does my butt feel like in the seat? What do I see? It's just driving a car. The problems don't start until the mind comes in and said, oh, but if traffic was moving faster, then I wouldn't be late. And if I wasn't late, then I wouldn't get in trouble, or I wouldn't feel distress or anxiety. And the mind just creates all of this. So this is how I think it's so important to just recognize what's actually coming in, because if we sustain that, then one, we don't get caught up in that comparative thinking. But then we also tend to notice, what is the emotional state of the body? And is there some anxiety, or am I in an environment that's creating some type of anxiety or something like that? And we just start to learn about how our body's reacting, and that can help provide some freedom as well. So I think cognitive reframing can be very helpful, but I think as a first step is to be really trained, make an effort to just keep coming back to what actual information is coming in through my senses and what's happening in the mind. And then when we are in a kind of a more peaceful state, when we're not caught in an emotion like anxiety or fear or anger, then we can say, okay, I kind of dealt with that by just really being with it. Now let's reframe this. Is it really that bad? No, it's not. How can I reframe this?
So Matt, I've had a great year with mindfulness as a core pillar, as part of my growth strategy. And this goes back to being exposed to it from you, a good friend of mine, Juliana Ray, who's number 3 on the Front Row Factor podcast. If you haven't heard that one, you got to go back and listen. For everybody out there, it's one of the most popular episodes to date. It's on perspective, mindfulness, and peak performance. And Juliana's had taught me in some one-to-one coaching, she had taught me some mindfulness techniques that helped me to go run a 45-mile marathon that I did with like very little training. It has helped me to be a better parent, to be more present and mindful, and it has truly been the one thing that has helped me not respond emotionally in a negative way in situations where there's chaos. So it has really helped me there. It's helped me in my business in order to prioritize the day. I find that my anxiety in the business, even if it's like I'm overwhelmed with opportunity, it's positive stuff, but it's still overwhelm. And this has really helped me to notice. I've noticed when I clench my jaw. I've noticed when I clench my fists. Mindfulness has helped me when I'm literally laying down to go to sleep, and I can tell that even though I'm hugging a pillow, my fist is clenched, and I'm like, whereas before it might have been 10 minutes before I recognized that I was clenching my fist because I was caught in that, versus now I'm so much more present to it that I go, oh, look at that. That's interesting. My fist, what is it? What's that emotion? I wonder what it is I've got anxiety about, or that I'm upset about, or whatever it might be. And without getting too much into all of the mindfulness practice that have ultimately led me there, simply understanding the basics of mindfulness in some ways has been enough to help me have quantum leaps. I can only imagine, and I'm excited about the prospect of going deeper and deeper into it, which, by the way, I need to thank you for writing the Mindfulness Edge, which comes out when?
Well, it's available for pre-order as this podcast is airing, I would imagine. Because and it's the actual publication date is March 7th.
Yeah, awesome. And people can get it at matttenney.com, and we'll link to that in the show notes. But this is so great. And I happen to have an advanced copy in my hands. Matt, I've been devouring the book, and it's so great. There's so much in it. And here's the thing. I want people to be able to leave this show today understanding some basics. I want them to have some practical tools. And I also wanted to get into, which I think that already, if somebody hung up right now, they've got tons of great info. Let me ask you a couple of specific questions relating to the book, some stuff that stood out for me. So on page 6, it's titled Beginner's Mind, and you give a quote from a teacher, Shunru.
Shunryu Suzuki.
Yeah, okay, there you go. I'm glad you said it. He said, in the beginner's...
I presume that's right. I'm just a parrot repeating what I've heard other people say.
Cool.
I never met him. I think he passed.
You said it with authority. It sounded really good. He said, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. Now, I think this is a practical strategy. It's like, even for somebody to take right now, pen, marker, something, write it down, hang it up on the wall. It just says, I have a beginner's mind. Give us a short description of a beginner's mind, how somebody could take this and apply it perhaps today in their life.
Oh, sure. Well, I think, as you saw in the book, I kind of used that to introduce mindfulness. But I think there are two ways that having a beginner's mind is very, very important. One is kind of on just the macro scale, which I think is where most people are operating most of the time, which is, what can I do to maybe have a breakthrough that's going to change my life, or to see an opportunity that I normally wouldn't see or that other people don't see, or to be better able to learn something new because I don't already have this attitude that I know everything about everything. I think when we're able to have a beginner's mind, and just to clarify, this doesn't mean that we have to forget what we know. I mean, our knowledge is great, especially for people who read a lot. We're full of knowledge, and this is great. We don't have to forget it. The idea is to just be able to not be a prisoner of it, which I think is what happens for most people, is that we believe that we go into a situation already having the answer. And I think if we go into more moments of our lives with the attitude of just being like a child and asking more questions and being more inquisitive, what's going to happen is we don't have to forget what we know, but we're not going to be as constrained by what we know, and we'll learn more things. We'll probably have better relationships with people because we'll be asking more questions and getting them to talk instead of us blabbering away about everything we know. But also, this is where some really major breakthroughs come. And as I wrote about in the book, this was when Einstein was asked why he was the physicist that was transformed our understanding of the world more than anyone in history. His answer was basically that. It was, I never lost my childlike curiosity. I was willing to ask really childlike, naive questions, put down all my expertise in physics and a little bit in math. He wasn't the greatest mathematician, but he was way better than you or I probably. But he was willing to put those things down and just ask really childlike questions. And that's what he credits to being the most transformative scientist who had these just incredible discoveries about how our world actually works. But now when we take that attitude to a moment-to-moment basis, this is actually the essence of mindfulness training. It's to have this curious, because one thing that I see a lot with people when they start practicing mindfulness is if you go read 10 books, you're going to have 50 different techniques in your head. And you're going to be overwhelmed, like, oh, should I be doing this or should I be doing that? And this person says this thing and that person says that thing. And I want to leave you, like, if you remember nothing from this podcast, other than this idea, I think it will help you tremendously if you begin practicing mindfulness. And that is, it doesn't matter what technique you're doing. They all have some positives and they all have some drawbacks. What matters is your attitude in each moment of making the effort to practice. If you have the attitude of just being curious and open to what's actually coming in through your senses, including with your thinking in this moment, without judgment, just having the attitude of kind of like, so what's it like now? What is this moment like? And if we just have that attitude and then do it again now, and then do it again now, and then do it again now, I can tell you that is all you would ever need to do to grow in the practice of mindfulness. You don't need 50 different techniques. If you can sustain that attitude.
That's right.
And the interesting thing is some of us have that. Many of us are being mindful, where to me, being mindful is shifting from being our thinking, being that voice in our head that's constantly talking and analyzing and judging and just blabbering away about nonsense. We're shifting from being that to being aware of our thinking, to actually seeing our thoughts objectively, having some space between our awareness and our thinking. And that happens the moment that you ask that question. What is actually happening right now? And if you ask it with that open, curious attitude, you have just become mindful. You don't have to try to do anything. Just sustain that attitude. And when you've created that space, That's where freedom is. So again, I think many of us do that every day. Like there are probably 100, 200 times a day where we become aware of our thinking. We have a little bit of space. But for most of us, we only do it for maybe 5, 10, at the most 15 seconds. For most people, it's probably less than 5, where we become aware of our thinking, and then we go right back to just talking to ourselves, being caught in our thinking, sometimes so distracted that we don't remember if we locked our front door when we leave our house, or we pass an exit on a freeway because we didn't even see the sign because we're so caught in our thinking. So most of us spend most of our time like that, where we're either partially or mostly caught or distracted by our thinking. And so what mindfulness training is about, it's nothing magical or mysterious or mystical. It's basically taking something that you already do, which is becoming self-aware, aware of what's happening in your own mind and body, which then frees you to be aware of what's happening around you because you're not distracted by your thinking. And just trying to do that more intentionally instead of just doing it on accident. And then learning to sustain it for longer and longer periods of time, and then eventually learning to sustain it in increasingly demanding situations where somebody could be arguing with you and you could still have that space where no emotion is coming up. You're just perfectly calm and able to really be with that person and help them through whatever their problem is. All of that comes back to, it can all be summarized in just coming back to what's happening now, non-judgmentally, with that curious beginner's mind, and then trying to do that now, and then now, and then now. And every time your mind comes in and says, oh, this is stupid, I shouldn't do this, I should go do that, but just, okay, well, and now what's happening?
Yeah.
And now.
Yeah.
And when you can learn to sustain it, that's when some pretty interesting things start to happen. That's when transformation starts to occur.
Yeah. Living a great life is about managing the moment, right? You go, how do I live a great life? You go, well, you got to have a great year this year. How do you have a great year? 12 great months. How do you have a great month? 30 great days. How do you have 30 great days, right? It's like manage the next hour, right? Is how you have a great day. And then you're like, how do you get a great hour? You manage the moment. Exactly. The next 60 seconds, you got to manage this moment. And so I love that.
And so what does that mean? So if you're saying, so how do I effectively manage this moment? This is where I think really gets to the crux of how crucial it is that we train our minds. Yeah. Because we do all types of things to add tactics and ideas and knowledge to how we can improve our lives. But guess what it really all comes down to is how healthy is our mind in this moment?
That's right.
You know, what is the mind that we're bringing to the table in this moment and the next and the next? If our mind is unhealthy and it's not as optimal as it could be in terms of how it functions, not about how much knowledge we have in our brain, but how the mind actually functions, how it receives information and how the body responds to that information, that is trainable. And I can't think of a better place to invest our energy because the mind is the basis of everything. Every decision we make, every success, every failure, all comes down to how our mind functions. And the question is it functioning as optimally as it could be, or is it not? And if it's not, guess what? We can do something to change that. We can train it. And that, to me, that's how you manage the moment, is managing how the mind functions in that moment. Because if your mind is healthy, then you're going to make the right decision. You're going to have the positive interaction with the human being that you're with. You're going to be fully engaged in your work and therefore perform better than you would if you were partially distracted. All these things come when you bring a healthy mind to the table.
Yeah. Matt, one of my greatest fears is getting to the end of my life and saying, I missed that. I missed the boat. I lost my life because I wasn't being present to it. You know, that's a great fear of mine. And so when you wrote in the book about there's a study that involved 2,000 people, and it was revealed that we spend nearly 47% of our time essentially lost in thought, engaged in mind wandering. Mm-hmm. I have no problem with, mind wandering and daydreaming if I'm present for that, if I can experience the joy of that.
Yeah.
But if it's happening without my knowledge, 47%, somebody's taking half of my life, and that's my inability to connect with my mind. That seems like starting place number one. If you want a productive tool, especially when you talk about without adding to your schedule, it's just recognizing something. It's like it's somebody's already hijacking that time, and you're just going and getting it back. And so I'm so excited about that part. That feels really good to me.
Cool. Yeah, and that study, by the way, was conducted by researchers at Harvard. It was Matt Killingsworth and I believe Dan Gilbert.
Dan Gilbert, yeah.
collaborated on that study. So this isn't just some fringe researchers. This is pretty solid research. And
is that Dan Gilbert of Stumbling on Happiness?
I think so. I can't remember his books off the top of my head, but I think you're right.
Oh, is
yes.
yeah, Dan.
It's the famous guy.
Favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Positive psychologist guy.
Very good. Yeah, that's awesome. So Matt, if let's say that you're young, you have a newborn, Francisco, right?
I do. Yeah, he's going to be 12 weeks on Friday.
Yeah, congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
It's so cool.
Talk about mindfulness training, boy. He is the best trainer I think I've ever had in my life.
Dude, before our podcast here, I came down, I was upstairs and I had my 15-month-old and my 6-year-old, and it was screaming and chaos.
Yeah.
And those are moments when you do get a chance to totally practice being mindful.
Well, also, not only do you get the chance to, really work with your own emotions, but what I'm alluding to in terms of what I think has been the most positive element of the training is I think I have a lot of weaknesses, but I think one of the biggest ones is I'm not naturally very empathetic. I'm not very well tuned into what somebody is feeling in the moment. Like I do a very good job imagining and generating compassion based on what I think, but I'm not good at like really being so sensitive to what somebody needs that I can just kind of intuitively grasp what they really need in the moment. And I think that's a really powerful skill. In fact, I would almost assert that might be the most important interpersonal skill we could ever develop, is to be so present and so empathetic with a person that we understand what they need, even if it's just they need nothing but for us to listen, or if they need nothing for us than to just sit with them. Like when I worked with kids who were dealing with cancer in the hospital, unfortunately, some of those kids didn't make it. And I've sat with, a 9-year-old as they're living their last days. In those moments, they don't need magic words of wisdom. They don't need you to tell them great stories. Sometimes they just need you to just sit there and hold their hand.
Yeah.
And I really think that's all any of us ever need to some degree, is we just need each other to be present with each other.
That's right.
When somebody's really present with us, we feel loved. And that's all that we really need in this life from others, is to just feel that we're loved. And being fully present, I think, does that. And so I've been working, mindfulness has helped with that, but Francisco has really helped with that, because as anyone who has a newborn, you're just thinking, you have to be so attuned to what's going on and really sensitive to, I think I just saw a yawn. If I don't get him down for his nap in 10 minutes, it's going to be chaos, and it's going to be my fault because I missed the window of getting him down for sleep before he only has so much cognitive resource available to soothe himself. And once he gets overtired or low on blood sugar, it's gone, and he's not going to fall asleep on his own, and it's going to be chaos. So of course I suffer too, but the suffering is more of just seeing him cry because he can't go to sleep. So I've just noticed he's really helped me to not be so much cognitively going into a situation thinking, how can I help this person? But more, how can I be with somebody and just be with them and be sensitive to what is happening, and thereby really uncovering what they need in that moment. And I think that's a skill that I've been traditionally weak at, that he's really helping me with.
Good. Go Francisco.
Yeah.
So let's say he is now 18 years old and he finds a copy of Dad's book, The Mindfulness Edge.
Yeah.
If there's only one story, concept, or chapter that he's going to read, what would you say is the most important?
That's a good question.
Music to my ears.
I think
that's what I want to hear from every guest.
I would think probably chapter 1, which is why I made it chapter 1, is just because it kind of outlines the why, like why should we make any effort to practice, right. But it also hits at the very heart of the practice. It hits at, how do you actually do this moment to moment on a daily basis in activities that you're already engaged in. And I think, as much as we love inspiring stories and, they can motivate us to then go take action, what I think is probably more helpful than anything is to understand the essence of something. Because if we grasp the essence of it, then all of the stuff around the edge just is helpful. Whereas if we don't grasp the essence, we could be motivated to go do something, but we're not doing the right thing, you know? So I think that's what you get in chapter 1. And that's probably what I want him to get is what is really the essence of what I should be doing moment to moment. And it's really that simple. It's to just, instead of allowing our default state to be mind wandering and distraction and not being fully present with what we're doing or who we're with, is to make the effort to change it so that our default state is being aware of our own thinking, our own emotional state, and what's happening around us in this moment, and then in this moment, and then in this moment. And as you mentioned, if we want to intentionally mind wander, I think it's great. In fact, that's actually, you're more likely to have creative thought when you allow your mind to wander than when you try to really just focus on the present moment, which is not actually mindfulness. But there's a lot of studies that show mindfulness is counterproductive for creativity. And it's usually because people are trying too hard, I think. They're trying to focus, which is not mindfulness. That's some type of concentration technique. However, if mind wandering is fine, but you hit it right on the head. It's if you choose to just look out the window and let your mind wander for 5 minutes, like which I do all the time when I fly. You know, I fly every week, and I like when I'm at 35,000 feet, I like to look out at the sky and the clouds and just let my mind wander. And that's oftentimes where I have some of the best thoughts that I'm going to have for weeks. However, to not let that be just our automatic default autopilot, which is, I think, how most of us spend most of our time.
That's right. So as we both are passionate about charities, both have experience with nonprofits, and as you're well aware in the front row, we help people that have a life-threatening illness to create a front row experience with their family members and their friends. So Matt, one of the questions I ask all of our guests is about death and knowing, embracing our mortality. How do you view death, and how does it help you to live more fully today?
Well, I think this may sound morbid to some, but I think reflecting on our mortality quite frequently, if it's done, especially if it's done with a clear, grounded state of, the mind's relatively collected because we've been practicing mindfulness and we're not totally distracted, I think it can be incredibly powerful. I know it has been for me, and traditionally how mindfulness is taught, throughout the centuries before it really became popular in the West, is one of the core practices, is to reflect on the impermanence of this body that we have and the fact that it's going to die. And that it's not going to, like 1,000 years from now. I mean, it's right around the corner. Imagine if you talk to any 90-year-old and you ask them to reflect on their life, they're going to say it seems like it was 10 minutes long. Yeah. And I think before I get to that point, I want to make sure that I'm doing things every day that are actually important. That I'm actually loving well today, that I listening to my wife and loving her well, listening to my son's needs through his cries and trying to love him well. And every person I interact with, I want to make sure that I'm loving well. And I think that is really facilitated by contemplating the fact that this body is going to die and that we have a limited time on this earth. And the other thing that happens is a little bit more subtle, but just kind of on a grand scale, I think that's where it's very helpful is to, in fact, some of the happiest people I know are people that meditate for about 30 minutes a day, their body dying, and they get pretty vivid about it. They actually visualize their body rotting and becoming dirt and being eaten by worms. And it sounds incredibly morbid. These are some of the happiest people you will ever meet. And I think how that happens is what happens when we do that is we start to kind of break up this attachment that we have to our ego. And it's a very useful tool to kind of break down this illusory sense of self that we have. It's just something created by our brains. I mean, the ego doesn't exist anywhere except for that it's created by the brain. And the problem is most of us believe that that's what we are, is this really strong sense of a separate me that's created by the brain called the ego. And the more that we believe that that's what we are, the more we suffer. And kind of as a very simple way of understanding that is just, if you believe that you are your thinking, then if your thinking is anything less than ideal, you're suffering. Right? Because if your thinking is not super happy, then you're less than super happy. But if you realize that that's not what you are, you're not your thinking, you're not that ego that your brain created. Now, it's normal to have ups and downs in life. You're going to have positive thinking sometimes. Sometimes your thoughts are going to become a little more negative. That's pretty normal. And if you see that that's not what you are, then all of a sudden it doesn't affect you anymore. And if you're not so caught up in the ego, not only are you not caught up in your own emotions as much, you're more free from your emotions, but you're also more kind and compassionate to people around you because you're less self-centered. And that is what brings real joy, is when you can have genuine connections with people around you because we're not so worried about ourselves and our short-term interests. And so I think that is also facilitated by just reflecting on our immortality. It starts to loosen up our attachment to our ego.
Well said. Let me switch gears here a little bit. And Matt, I can't believe we're already at 55 minutes. It's unbelievable. I feel this way every time I talk to somebody on a podcast. I'm like, where did it go? Speaking of talking to the 90-year-old, right? And looking back on their life, We just witnessed 60 minutes pass. And so by the way, thank you for giving 60 minutes of your life.
Oh, my pleasure.
And serving.
Thank you.
As you do. Matt, what does living life in the front row mean to you? And what's one thing that our listeners can do in the next 24 hours to live that way?
Well, this is going to maybe sound a little bit different than what you normally hear. I would imagine. I don't know.
I like it.
But this is what was really transformative for me, was I felt like I never had a problem taking action. In fact, I probably took too much action. And sometimes I took an action. One time I took an action that got me into some serious trouble because I took an action that was ill-advised and dishonest. So that's never been a problem for me. And I realized that I think the reason I took so much action was that I was always trying to get away from the suffering that I had inside. And I never wanted to face it. I always wanted to distract myself. And on the surface, it looks great because I perform above average as a beach volleyball player, as a Brazilian jiu-jitsu player, as a golfer, as a chess player. I get into something and I just really get obsessed. I do well with professional life, but I was always trying to get away from something. And I didn't know what I was trying to get away from, but I realized it was my own emptiness, this sense of emptiness that I was trying to fill. And so what I found is that if I take some time to slow down and be really honest about what thoughts are going through my mind, what my actual emotional state is, even if it's less than positive, if I'm feeling depressed, to be really honest about that and say, wow, there's this energy of depression here. What's it like? And immediately I'm free from it. I'm seeing it objectively. I'm not caught in it. And so in the moment, I have a little bit more peace and the depression goes by more quickly. But what I found is that it seems like opposite to what you're saying in the short term, right? It seems like I'm saying maybe take less action, maybe withdraw a little bit. But that's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is that we may very well be in the front row outwardly, but I'm suggesting we be in the front row of our own lives as well. And not just kind of hide back someplace where we're not really being honest about what's going on in the moment in our mind and body, but really being right in the front row and saying, this is what's happening. There's anger right now, or there's anxiety right now, or there's depression right now, or there's great joy right now. And what I found is that the more that I make that inner world very front row, very conscious, now I still take as much action as I used to, but it's much more productive action. Instead of, not that I'm saying playing golf and Brazilian jiu-jitsu and beach volleyball are not, that you shouldn't do that. I'm just saying I've kind of naturally let those things go because I'm focusing more on things that I think really help the people around me. And that has brought me so much more joy than going and entertaining myself playing games. And so that's what I think for me has been the key idea for being more front row, is making inner world more front row, which then has allowed this freedom from negative emotion and an increase in positive emotion, an increase in motivation, but also an increase in clarity on what really matters in this life and where we should spend our time. And then because we're not caught in negative emotion, we just go do it. It's not like there's this cognitive process of I have to go do this, this, and this. It's just like a natural response. Oh, this person needs help with something. I'll do that right now. It becomes a response.
I love it. Be in the front row of your own life.
Yeah.
I love it. And sometimes taking that action is deciding to take an no action. Like literally, like the action is stop. The action is observe. The action is listen. The action is, right, like conquer that fear. Don't run away. The action is something, yeah, as you said, it's inwardly focused. It's, the action is to own it, whatever it might be. So action is such an interesting word, right? A lot of times we think it's something that we're going to go produce outwardly,
right?
And some experience we're going to create something that we're going to be able to get recognized for by others, versus just looking at that inner voice and saying, how can we become our own raving fan?
Yeah.
And how can we attend our own show?
Well, yeah, if you think you've probably seen people like this, but I've noticed people who you talk to them and you say, hey, do you have time to chat? They're like, no, I'm crazy busy. What about 2 weeks from now? And they're from like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. They're just crazy busy. They're doing all this, they're doing that. And if you look at what they actually produce, it's next to nothing. They're crazy. They're crazy busy, but they're doing stuff that just doesn't matter.
Yeah. What are you busy doing?
Yeah. What are you doing? And I'm like, dude, I don't answer a phone call for 3 hours in the morning. Like I don't do anything except just do things that really matter. Like I try to take 3 hours every day to just what really matters. What's something I could do that really moves the needle? And it's amazing. If you really get clear on what moves the needle, you don't have to be crazy busy because the stuff you do matters. Right. It's like,
that's right.
So I'm sure you've noticed that though, right? Of people who are just,
absolutely.
They seem very busy, but they're not really getting much done.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And we could probably all relate to that struggle too, of being caught up in that.
Yeah. Oh, I still do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. One more comment about mindfulness affecting my focus is it allowed me to look at how I feel when I look at my to-do list. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I was able to restructure my to-do list into what has to be done today, what has to be done in the next 7 days, the next 30 days, and what's long-term. Mm-hmm. And just being able to be present enough with a task to be able to understand even the emotion and the vibe and how much that will move the needle, to be able to take time to plan. Planning for me is the mindfulness piece. Mm-hmm. And when, the busier I get, the more time I need to plan, the more time I need to think this through, because then the one motion or action or move that I make is critical. It's like chess, right? Like sometimes yes, it's good to move quickly, but it's also good to just really be thoughtful, because that one move could be critical. Matt, dude, I could talk to you forever. It's so funny when I get to the end of these podcast interviews, I'm looking at a list of like 30 questions that I could talk to you for seriously the next 3 hours and never run out of questions to ask. Let me finish with what I'm calling the 10 in 1, which is I got 10 questions for you that I'm looking for one word or one sentence answers only.
Okay.
So this is gut reaction, one word or one sentence, the first that comes to mind. So some of these are fun. Some of them are, they're all over the place. So let me start off with an easy one. Ready? What's your favorite meal of the day, and what's on the menu when it's perfect?
I have the same thing every day, so it's always perfect.
And what's that?
It's kind of a homemade breakfast cereal that's just raw oats, frozen organic blueberries, banana, some protein powder, and some almond milk, and usually a little bit of peanut butter, all mixed together. And it's kind of like having a fruity peanut butter. It's like having a peanut butter and jelly sandwich cereal, but there's no refined sugar. It's just all natural stuff.
Oh, cool. I want to ask you at some point why you eat that every day, but let me get through the rest of these questions.
Okay.
Because on one hand, it might be that for me, it's when the idea systems set you free. Mm-hmm. And this idea that when I don't have to think about it and I just do it, I leave all this other creative energy for doing other things.
That's when I'm home. Okay, when I'm traveling, there's other things, but that's when I'm home. I do have the same thing every day.
You spice it up. Right. All right, cool. Question number 2. What does it mean to be fully alive?
To be free from the constraint of the mind.
What's the next place that you most want to travel?
To my living room to kiss my newborn.
What are you feeling grateful for right now?
Being on this Skype conversation with you.
Thank you. What's one quality or value more than any other that you would want your child, Francisco, to experience from you in life?
Empathy.
What's one documentary that should be mandatory viewing for all humans? I can come back to that one if you want.
Yeah, I'm going to have to take a pass. I'm not much of a TV or movie watcher.
All right, good. Oh, good. How about a book? Other than the Mindfulness Edge and Serve to Be Great.
Those are great ones. Yeah, I agree. Those are good. I think Love is the Killer app, I think, is a fantastic book for any in the professional realm.
Tim Sanders. Yeah. Super. That's a great one. To date, what is something that you are super proud of in your life?
What's happened over the last couple of weeks where I've prioritized my son and taken care of him over things that I might have thought were more important only a few weeks ago. Beautiful.
When you get sad, what's it usually about?
When the people around me or somebody that I see around me is suffering.
If you had to pick one person to switch brains with for a day, who would it be?
Oh, wow. Can they be alive or dead?
Sure.
Probably a teacher of mindfulness from Thailand named Ajahn Chah.
Cool. I'll have to look him up. Last question. What live event do you most want to see in the front row? And they have to be performing now.
Oh, wow. Probably a TED Talk from somebody who's just got a really killer applicable idea on how to make our world a better place.
Awesome. Maybe a Simon Sinek future TED Talk?
Something like that, yeah.
I know you guys are friends. Matt, thank you so much, man, for being playful, for sharing your heart, your wisdom. You're just such a brilliant human being, and you've really overcome some great struggles within your life to become this person or reveal a person that was always there to the world, this servant leader. And I know you're helping so many, you're inspiring so many, you've inspired me. I know people can find you online at matttenney.com, right?
Yes, that's true.
matttenney.com. We'll link to that. Guys, go pick up a copy of Serve to Be Great, pick up the Mindfulness Edge, amazing books. Follow Matt and just be a part of what he's up to because it's pretty darn exciting. I will tell you that I'll keep linking to Matt's stuff throughout the weeks, months, and years ahead. I'm a raving fan. And Matt, I just want to say this to you as I say to all my guests, which is I thank you for creating a world that my kids are growing up in. And I hope that down the road that one of the greatest moments I can imagine experiencing in life will be our children playing together and seeing our children thriving and becoming leaders themselves in their own way in the gifts that they've been given. But I appreciate you for being a force for good in the world and really putting out principles and energy and ideas that are, I think, pillars for what is ultimately, as we talked about earlier today, your mission and your primary goal to create the conditions for a permanent end to poverty, violence, and suffering in our world within your lifetime. That is so cool, man. I am super honored to be part of your mission and have a front row seat to it, to be observing and even participating in your life. So thank you, man.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I will just say I agree with everything you said and feel the same about you, my friend.
Awesome. Well, dude, we'll have to do maybe a round 2 down the road. And so I can ask the rest of my 42 questions I didn't get to.
I'd be happy to.
All right, man. We'll talk to you later.
Bye for now.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that chat with Matt Tenney as much as I did. Thanks for listening today. Make sure to check out his book at themindfulnessedge.com. We'll link to that in the show notes. You can get there by going to frontrowfactor.com/podcast. Also, Matt's encore episode is coming out in just a couple of days. That's questions from you, the community, asked to our guest. And where you can post your questions for future interviews is by going to frontrowfriends.com. That will get you to our Facebook group, and there you can post your questions. Also, thanks for sharing the show. If you listened today and thought, man, my friend would really enjoy this, forward the link. This is all about sharing with others. So pay it forward, ask yourself who could benefit, and constantly be somebody sharing value. That's it for today. Can't wait to have you back on the next show. If you've got any ideas for me about how we can continue to improve or bring you new topics or new guests, please hit me up on Twitter or Facebook. It's at John Vroman, JONVROMAN. You can also get to us right through frontrowfactor.com. Take care, everybody. Talk to you next time.
That's all for this episode of the Front Row Factor. To discover more simple and effective ways to lead a fearless front row life, please visit frontrowfactor.com and subscribe to John's 4 Minutes in the Front Row, where he shares quick stories from real life experiences. Thanks again for joining us today. We hope our show inspires you to live big, give big, and experience life to the fullest. See you next time on the Front Row Factor.